Hello, everybody. I am Sofia Fadidu, ESR 14, and today I'm going to present the initial results and exploratory analysis from the RAIS Consortium experiment, as well as some lessons learned throughout the process. Today, we're going to talk about the motivation behind the experiment, some related work, the contributions of the RAIS dataset specifically, how we designed the RAIS study, and then we're going to see some exploratory analysis with regards to user engagement, data quality, and the lessons learned from the whole process, as well as stories with regards to our users and what our data tells us about them. I want to especially thank Christina Karagianni, ESR 13, who's working with me in AUTH, and together we are preparing this paper draft for the RAIS Consortium experiment, who really contributed a lot to the exploratory data analysis and generally the whole process of the data analysis. Specifically, why did we do this study? Why did we want to start in the beginning with Stefanos and collect data from collect user data? Generally, wearable technology allows us to explore and study various aspects of human behavior unobtrusively, or what somebody could say in the wild. For example, we can examine stress and mood detection, user engagement with wearables, physical activity, mental and physical health in general, sleep, and generally how they can correlate with each other. So wearable devices and their collected data are a rich source of information. The open datasets out there, they suffer from some limitations. So every dataset is unique to the use case it was and the research question it was designed to answer. But generally, many datasets suffer from a small sample size. Because of the difficulty of conducting large studies, a great number of studies have only a few participants, like 10 in the number of tens. Also, many experiments have short duration. For example, the extrasensory dataset is a lab-constrained dataset that technically has essentially just 1 or 2 days of data, or a few hours. Some of them suffer from low engagement. The My Heart Counts dataset, for example, is a really large dataset starting from MIT. From Stanford Medicine. And it includes thousands of users using wearable devices. However, the problem is that the average engagement is a little bit more than 4 days. So this makes it prohibitive for some scenarios. For example, you cannot run concept drift algorithms on data coming from 4 days because, well, concept drift cannot exist most likely in 4 days. Similarly, there are datasets that have similar contributions to ours and are very correlated to ours, but however, they offer some additional or they exclude some other modalities. So, of course, as you can understand, like datasets with different modalities can serve different purposes. And finally, there are some datasets that are in the lab setting, and there is plenty of research supporting that datasets in the lab setting do not necessarily represent the realistic behavior of the users. To that end, we've decided, along with Stefanos in the beginning and Professor Vakali, and in collaboration with the RAIS Consortium, of course, to conduct the RAIS Consortium experiment, as you all know, which is a large-scale, geographically distributed experiment and study of human sensing data collecting unobtrusively in the wild. So what are our contributions? We have a sample size that's larger than 60% of related interventions. Specifically, we have 71 users. A duration longer again than 60% of related interventions. Specifically, we have data up to 9 weeks per round. In total, we have data for 4 months of data for all participants. We have a drop rate that's much lower than other related interventions. Our drop rate was 7%, and by drop rate, to clarify, by drop rate, I mean the participants who started the experiment but did not finish it or did not give their data at the end of the experiment. We have multiple data modalities, including both commonplace and novel sensor data. Specifically, we have more than 25 types of Fitbit data, 7 survey types, and 2 ecological momentary assessments. A clarification again, ecological momentary assessments are surveys that users get on a daily basis on their real environment. So the moment, let's say you are eating, I send you a notification, and I'm asking you, what are you doing right now? And you're supposed to say, I'm eating. So these sort of surveys are called ecological momentary assessments. And then we are talking about an in the wild study, which means that it has the potential to represent the naturalistic behavior of users. So what was the process from a researcher's viewpoint? Initially, for approximately 1 year to 9 months ahead, we defined the requirements for the experiment, specifically what was the collaborators' research agenda and what we would like to collect. Then, approximately 8 months before the study, we started with the study design in terms of defining the research question, the data modalities to be collected, the technologies to be used, and the study process. Then this whole duration lasted for approximately 4 months. And then at the end of that, we had to apply for an ethics committee approval, given that we are working with human subjects. Then we got in communication with Sarunas and the RAIS Consortium, we purchased the Fitbit devices and distributed them to all RAIS partners. Then at step 5, we started the geographically distributed recruitment of participants, and we especially made some efforts to achieve a balance, not only in geographic distribution, but also in terms of gender, because previous datasets had suffered from biases in terms of gender distribution. Then during the experiment, we made sure that we monitored what data gets collected. For example, we had the system in place that if a user wouldn't wear their Fitbit, it would send a reminder to them to engage more with the study. Or if the user did not, let's say, answer to the surveys that were sent, we would send some pings to either the users themselves or the recruiting ESRs. Finally, we had the wrap up after 9 weeks, where essentially we coordinated the collection of the Fitbit data and also collected back the devices. And currently, and we are in this stage of the exploratory data analysis, we had to perform data integration, pre-processing, anonymization in collaboration with Forth, and exploratory data analysis. However, of course, the participants' viewpoint is much different. It starts with the recruitment. So after the recruitment, the participants are informed about what their participation to the experiment means, that their data would be shared anonymously, and they provide their informed consent. Then we have the entry phase, where the participants receive their Fitbit device, and also they complete a set of entry surveys, which we will see later in more detail. We encourage the participants to continue with their normal routine, and then at the end of the experiment, essentially during the experiment, we collect EMAs, ecological momentary assessments, weekly surveys, and Fitbit data for up to 9 weeks per participant. At the exit phase, the participants are requested to export their Fitbit data, reset their device, and complete some exit surveys. So what sort of data do we have? In terms of surveys, we have demographic surveys, surveys that refer to the health conditions a user might have, exercise motivation surveys, the stage of behavior change the user is in, so how ready they are to take up exercise, personality surveys, stress and positive and negative affect surveys. In terms of ecological momentary assessment, we have approximately 10K self-reported labels, and they refer to daily step goals. So every morning we would ask the users, how many steps would you like to do today? And these are essentially the self-reported labels. And then we have mood labels. So 3 times a day we would ask the users, how do you feel? And they had a choice of emotions to choose from. and the location surveys, where we would ask the user where they are located right now to get the context of the user, whether they were at work or outdoors or exercising, etc. Finally, of course, we have the sensing data. We have approximately 100 million rows of sensing data, and they refer to physical activity, whether that means steps, whether that means exercise sessions, or altitude, essentially floors climbed. We also have sleep data, and while the sleep data are considered to be daily granularity, like in terms that you have one sleep session per day per user at maximum. The sleep data themselves include very detailed information about the sleep stages of the users, like at some seconds granularity. So they're really excellent for sleep analysis. Then we have ECG and heart rate data. ECG is a new technology that Fitbit has integrated in Fitbit Sense, and the heart rate data has especially fine granularity in terms of like a heart rate every 10 seconds or so, beats per minute. And then we have the SpO2, or oxygen variation, which is essentially measured every night. So when the users go to sleep, Fitbit Sense measures approximately how much their oxygen variation is, their SpO2 levels, and gives, let's say, an approximation. We also have VO2 max, which is an estimation of how fit the user is, temperature, skin temperature, stress and mindfulness sessions, calories, and altitude. Note that the types in bold are quite new in terms of modalities in commercial wearables, and hence they cannot be found easily in other datasets in the wild. With regards to when we can find which types of data, on week 0, the users completed a consent form and the recruiters helped them set up their Fitbit devices. On week 1, we had the demographic survey as well as the PAR-Q survey, which examined if the users suffer from some health condition that prevents them from exercising. On week 2, we had a set of surveys that were both psychological as well as some weekly surveys, such as the PANAS and the STAI survey, that measure the affects and the emotions of the users, whether it's positive or negative, and the stress level. So in green, you can see the emotion survey, and in pink, you can see the stress level survey that was delivered to the users on a weekly basis. On the darker green, let's say, you can see the EMAs, so the psychological momentary assessments that were given to the users on a daily basis for the whole duration of the experiment. Finally, on week 9 of the experiment, apart from asking the users to export their Fitbit data, we also had some repeat surveys, specifically the stage of behavior change survey, that is the TTM survey, and the break survey. These surveys refer to the relationship of the user of a user with exercise, and we wanted to see if this changes from the entry stage to the exit stage of the experiment. Now we have some plots with regards to user engagement in round 1 and round 2. Obviously, like most of the users provided their Fitbit data, which is the purple line, we can see a general drop in the users wearing their Fitbit over time, but this is expected, and it's the same in similar experiments. Then we noticed that the context and mood survey, and the step goal SEMA surveys, essentially the EMA surveys that we were sending daily to the users, they have, let's say, less compliance compared to the Fitbit data. That is expected again because it's not unobtrusive data collection, but it's actually we're asking feedback from the users, and of course not all users complete these surveys. The surprising thing here is that even though the step goal survey was 1 time per day and the context and mood survey was 3 times per day, the number of responses we received for both are pretty similar. So we don't have, let's say, 3 times more context and mood surveys. And this is something we want to explore further, whether it has to do with the timing, for example, of the surveys. And then finally, we have the surveys data. Okay, of course, we have a peak in the beginning and the end, but overall, we see that there is not exactly a pattern on the weekly surveys that the users tend to complete. And this is our less completed modality. So with regards to the compliance with the ecological momentary assessment app called SEMA, here in the first plot, we see a histogram of how much of the response rate per user. So let's say we see that in the first bin, we see that approximately 25% of the users had a response rate of between 0 and 15%, so quite low. On the other hand, we see that 25% approximately of the users had a response rate between 75 and 100. So they answered, let's say, 75 questions out of 100, given in the SEMA app. Of course, ideally, we would like all users to have higher response rate, but this is again a realistic scenario when you ask for user input. Then in order for the users to complete their weekly surveys, we were sending them weekly mail communication. So the second plot shows the open rates of the emails that we send to the user. We see that first of all, on round 1, we had higher open rates overall compared to round 2. And also we see that from an 80% open rate in week 0, which was the first email welcoming the participants, we fall below 60% in week 3, and then we have again a jump going around 70%. Now, we do not yet fully understand why there is a jump and suddenly participants decided to engage more. That might have something to do with the period, so whether, for example, it was holidays or something like that. And then we see again a drop and a peak. So there are a few peaks on engagement, and we want to investigate further why and when they happened. So I would say the most important lessons learned during the experiment are reported in this slide, and I will go one by one. First of all, we had out of control data quality issues. And what do I mean by that? We had corrupted records in our data due to user mistakes. For example, we had users who reported the very wrong weight, for example, 10 kg. This does not only affect their weight, but it also affects other modalities in the Fitbit dataset. For example, the weight affects how the calories are calculated. So let's say if you have a wrong input from the user, that affects other modalities as well. Then we had also corrupted records, but due to Fitbit export problems. For example, we had Fitbit exported dates that were in the 70s. So again, you cannot do anything about that because this has something to do with the Fitbit database. We also had corrupted records due to problematic algorithms of Fitbit. For example, when we looked thoroughly into the streaming data that we currently exclude from the dataset, we noticed that users seem to stream every day. Most likely, we assume that the algorithm, let's say, passed everyday activities such as hand washing potentially or taking a shower for streaming. So in that sense, if you check, let's say, the records of the users for streaming, you see streaming data almost in every day for every user. Then we have missing records due to no wear time. Of course, if our users do not choose to wear their Fitbit, let's say, to sleep, we cannot do anything about it. And then we have missing records again due to Fitbit export problems. So it happened that we do not have step data for all participants, but we do have, let's say, exercise data for all participants. So when we dig deeper into this issue, we noticed that for some participants, a small number of participants, Fitbit had exported only a subset of their data for unknown reason. And as you can imagine, it's not possible that you have exercise data, but you do not have step data. I mean, if you wear your Fitbit, you necessarily have some step data recorded. So we also had some data quality issues that were within our control, and we managed to, let's say, overcome them. That is the multi-language export. So because the experiment was geographically distributed, when participants exported their data, many of the some data types were in foreign languages. For example, exercise. It could say, for example, podilasia in Greek, which means cycling in English. So we would have podilasia as a record and cycling as well. So we had to convert them, of course, into a unified format, of course, an English format, and that happened based on the exercise ID. So we grouped by exercise ID and then selected the English name for each exercise type. One of the most challenging issues I would say we encountered, and anybody who would be working with Fitbit data would encounter, is the multi-time zone exports. That means that when Fitbit exports the data, it does not necessarily export all types in the same time zone. For example, it exports steps and calories in GMT format, and it exports, let's say, exercise sessions in local time. So for example, when we plotted, let's say, the sleep data, we noticed some very weird sleep sessions during the day or like very late into the night. And then we realized that, let's say, if I was located in Greece, Fitbit pretended that I was located in Iceland, or like, so we had to convert essentially the data types that were exported in GMT format into the correct local time of the user. So how do you get the local time of the user? Fitbit does provide the time zone of the user, but of course, this is a single time zone. So let's say, for me, it could be Europe, Athens, or for the fellows in Sweden, it could be Europe, Stockholm. However, of course, this does not account for holidays or vacation in different time zone locations, but this is let's say, an assumption we have to make in order to convert the time zones. And one very difficult thing was also the lack of Fitbit documentation. What I've mentioned before, that Fitbit exports different data types in different time zones, is not reported anywhere in Fitbit. The only place that is actually reported is the community forum. So we had to dig deep and search these sort of differences ourselves with Christina, and also get the support of the community. I will also show you a few diagrams and plots from our exploratory data analysis. First of all, this is a correlation of how different Fitbit types correlate with each other. For example, we see here that the stress score correlates to the maximum extent, 1, with a sleep points percentage, exertion points percentage, and responsiveness points percentage. What does this say to us? Fitbit calculates the stress score as a combination of these three factors in the dataset. So the stress score that Fitbit gives is a potentially linear combination of these three variables, which are affected by sleep schedule, physical activity, and skin conductance level. Another example is that this is somehow expected, of course, is that the number of steps is highly positively correlated with the calories someone burns and the distance they do. Specifically, it's 0.7% correlated with calories and 1 correlated with distance. And another one, the resting heart rate of the user is negatively correlated with calories as well as the demographic VO2 max, which is the fitness level of the user. So let's say resting heart rate is 0.3 negatively correlated with calories and 0.6 negatively correlated with the fitness level of the user. In other words, the higher the heart rate, the lower the VO2 max, the lower the fitness level of the user is. Of course, there are like similar, if you really look into this table in detail, you can see more correlations and explore further, but these are some initial examples. Here, mostly I will be showing you examples from round 1. Or some examples of round 1 and 2. Here we notice the two things in the first diagram. First of all, that the most active time of the most active time of the day in terms of walking for the users is just after work, so between 5 and 6 o'clock, 5 and 7 o'clock. The most active time is denoted by yellow. Also, we notice that this behavior changes in the weekend, specifically Saturday afternoon is an equally active time, whereas Sunday is a more chill time for the users. We also notice a difference on the second diagram with respect to sleeping hours. If you see, generally on the weekdays, sleeping hours vary from 12 o'clock to 9 in the morning. However, in the weekends, there is an offset of approximately 2 hours. Generally, I would say here that people tend to sleep very, very late, and I didn't expect that. Here is also another plot from round 1. Specifically, Fitbit gives us the number of sedentary minutes, lightly active minutes, moderately active minutes, and very active minutes per participant. This is the average of all participants per category per day. It should not exactly come as a surprise that the majority, let's say, of the participant or the average is like very, very sedentary. The green color, as you see, really is the majority of the data set, followed by a little bit of lightly active minutes and with very few moderately and very active minutes. Next, and this is something I find very interesting, is how well can users predict their own activity. So if you remember, we used to ask the users every day, so how many steps do you want to do per day? Then we correlated these answers with the actual number of steps they performed. And as you can see, the higher the goal they set during the day, the higher the steps they actually did, or the higher the steps they knew they would do, the higher the goal they declared. Because, I mean, it's not exactly causation, but there is a correlation between the two quantities. So you can see, for example, that the pink box, which is an 8 to 10,000 steps goal, the users actually performed on average 10K steps on that day. Or the yellow box, which is 15 to 20K steps, the user actually performed 17.5K steps on that day. So they were really pretty good on predicting their actual activity levels. And then another one on the same note, we also have the previous plot, but conditioned by gender. So how well, let's say, are people of different genders predicting their physical activity? We noticed in the beginning that the averages, let's say, the average prediction up to 8K steps are very similar for male in green and female in orange. Where we see a difference is essentially after 10K steps, so above, let's say, the recommended guidelines, where for the same goals, so for example, for the goal 10 to 15K in here, you see that the females who declare this goal tend to walk more than to overperform, let's say, compared to the males who declare this goal. The same goes for the 15 to 20K goal. So again, the females tend to walk more. The females who declare this goal tend to walk actually more compared to the males who declare this goal. And then when it comes to 20 to 25K, we can see that the averages are similar, but the males have a much wider variance. So it's like a wild guess. So like I say, I will do 20 to 25K, but I could as well do like 7.5K or 25K. So let's say this is more of a wild guess. So that was another, like, a little bit of a fun conclusion that we got from this specific diagram, but we did not, let's say, identify up to now other differences in terms of how well you can predict your physical activity based on age, fitness level, or BMI. Then another thing is like, does activity affect stress? So let's say if we see how much the users walk, how many steps they perform, does it actually affect their Fitbit stress score? This should come as no surprise that the more the users walk, the higher their stress score. Note here that in Fitbit, the best stress score is 100, so the more the better. If you have 100 stress score in Fitbit, you are Zen. If you have a stress score of 0, you're probably a PhD candidate. And so essentially here, it should come as no surprise, given the fact that we know that Fitbit's stress score is correlated with users' physical activity. Similarly, we wanted to check whether how well the Fitbit stress score correlates with the self-reported stress levels of the users based on the weekly surveys that they were computing. This is some initial exploratory analysis. We noticed no differences in the below average and average categories of stress score, but we do notice a difference in the above average. So when users declared in their self-reports that they feel stressed, Fitbit actually picked up these signals from their activities and their behavior in their bodies, because their Fitbit stress score is actually lower. So it's lower than the other two categories. Similarly, we did the same for like the positive and negative emotions of the users. So what you see here is like the Fitbit stress score on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, you see whether the users answered that they feel tense on the specific day. For example, in 0, if they said that, no, I'm not tense today, or 1, if they said, yes, I'm tense today. We did not find any statistical significant difference, and also we noticed that the average Fitbit stress score is very similar to both categories, so regardless of whether the users said they are tense or not. On the contrary, here we see like the same box plots and the Fitbit stress score for users who reported that they are not happy during the day, so 0, versus happy for the day. So in that sense, we see that users who report that they're happy during the day, they actually have higher Fitbit stress scores. Both of these plots, as well as the previous slide, give us an idea that there is some correlation between the Fitbit stress score and what the users report. So overall, these are the reports of the users in terms of emotions. We see that mostly users either answered that they are rested, relaxed, followed by tired or happy. There were less responses in the purple, pink, and green in terms of like tense, neutral, or alert. I'm sorry, and much less responses in terms of sad responses. Here we see a similar plot for the locations that the users declared they are in. It should come as no surprise, given that we are in the COVID era, that the majority, at least 50% of responses are home. So let's say 50% of the time users responded they are home, followed by work or school, then outdoors, and at the purple, and at a much smaller level, entertainment, gym, other, or transit. So that essentially gives a pretty good time of the life of a pretty good idea of the life of our participants. Finally, what we are doing currently with the RAIS dataset, specifically with the 4th fellows, we're working on the anonymization of the datasets, which will allow us to publish it in a journal, hopefully by summer. Then in AUTH, we do an exploratory data analysis, so we can produce more graphs and investigate correlations for the paper, as well as the manuscript draft, of course. Currently, I know we have some ongoing projects at least, such as in AUTH, we are working on the explainability of machine learning models in personal informatics using the RAIS dataset, but also in Insubria, I know HI is working with privacy preservation models using the dataset. Similarly, there are, of course, like more fellows projects and student projects that are working on the dataset, and I'm more than happy to hear like suggestions from you on whether this dataset could be useful for your research. Key takeaways. The RAIS dataset is a large-scale multimodal dataset that could be used that could offer many opportunities for exploration in various domains. The data quality issues emit either from user errors, system errors, or let's say mistakes that we did in the experiment design. Some open questions that we still have. We have so much data. What we would like is to tell a story with this data, and we are wondering how can we essentially explore them, or how can we present them to the public so that we can tell a story about the lives of our users. And finally, of course, any ideas for collaborations or data exploration or anything you found interesting would be more than welcome. Thank you for your attention, and I'm glad to receive your questions.